Hello and welcome to the Comic-Con at Home Fantagraphics Press new science fiction panel. My name is Matthew Jackson. I am a comics journalist and a contributor at SYFY WIRE, and I am very pleased to be joined today by three amazing cartoonists who all have new science fiction graphic novels coming out from Fantagraphics soon. So let's go ahead and meet the cartoonists. First up is Joshua W. Cotter. His debut graphic novel, Skyscrapers of the Midwest, was nominated for an Ignatz Award in 2005. His multi-volume science fiction epic, Not Away, takes place in a near-future alternate reality and will see the release of its second volume, which is fantastic, this year. He lives in rural Northwest Missouri with his family and cats with an acute sense of impending mortality. They keep him making comics. Next up is Manuele Fior. He's an award-winning cartoonist, illustrator, and architect currently living in Venice. His work has appeared in The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, Rolling Stone, Le Monde, and La Repubblica. His new graphic novel, Celestia, which is also fantastic, tells the story of a group of young telepaths living on a small island and of the mainland population struggling to recover after being ravaged by a mysterious great invasion from the sea. And finally, we have Lane Milburn, a cartoonist based in Chicago, Illinois. His book, 12 Gems, was published by Fantagraphics, and he has self-published many other smaller works, including a weekly strip for Vice in 2015 entitled Envoy. In his new graphic novel, Lure, which, guess what, is fantastic, a group of idealistic young artists from Earth are commissioned to collaborate on a corporate art project for a planet that has been colonized for luxury living. It's scheduled to come out November later this year. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I kind of want to start in a very broad sense, since we are talking about science fiction in comics and as a genre, by asking each of you kind of what your sci-fi origin story is. What got you interested in the genre as fans, but also what got you so interested that you wanted to pursue storytelling in a science fiction vein?
Sorry, yeah, I mean, I think for many people, science fiction fandom begins in childhood, begins with television and movies and video games and so on. I read the Dune books when I was in college. I was always, as a child, creating imaginary worlds and so on. And I think, yeah, I've always enjoyed drawing and fantastical things and inventing worlds. My trajectory with science fiction started more pulpy and more sci-fi fantasy and more with kind of fully invented worlds. And then I think I've been moving more towards an incorporation of more of the real into my work. So it's kind of always been sci-fi, but the mode has changed a little bit in recent years.
Manuele?
So thank you. I actually was born in 75, so I grew up, I must say, with the Steven Spielberg education, I would say, like E.T. and Encounters of the Third Type. And of course, reading comics, I was always fascinated by this thing that I think is very connected to the essence of comic, to be science fictional. I mean, one of the first comics of the modern comics is Little Nemo, and it opens a very, very big door into science fiction, not only future, but science fiction, fictional fantasy. So when I started doing comics, I was very influenced by what L'Association did in France. So autobiographical issues, keep to a kind of a real point of view. But then book after book, I was kind of wanting of taking over again all my passions, starting from Moebius. All these works, they cross over themselves. Moebius, Ridley Scott, Steven Spielberg, the fantasy of Métal Hurlant. I don't know if I think you're aware of it, the review, the French review that kind of gave a new look on science fiction. But then when I started doing comics, I kind of mixed then my earlier passions, so the sci-fi trends of the 70s, of the 80s, with what I learned actually in doing comics, with autobiography, a kind of look that is a bit more toward the interior than the exterior. And so to see what happens also to our a kind of science fiction of our inner feelings is what was most interesting to me, rather than evolution of technology. So to make it very short.
My experience growing up in the 70s and 80s was also, well, it was a little different because growing up in rural America, I didn't have access to a lot of books. So much of my influence was what little was on television and science fiction films. I didn't watch them exclusively, but I seemed to gravitate. My interest was more in science fiction than a lot of other genres. But I never saw myself becoming a sci-fi author. It just kind of naturally evolved that way. I'd say when I got older and started reading more and seeing more film, Kubrick, how he approached science fiction had a huge impact on me. And like you were saying, it's not so much about the technology that I'm interested in. It's more about the human element within not fantastic elements, but elements that things we haven't achieved quite yet, but things that are quite possible. So I would say as far as growing up, my interests were pretty much standard kid influences in the 70s, 80s. Kubrick especially, and Kurt Vonnegut was another one that showed me that a lot of people don't think of Vonnegut as sci-fi, but his work is very much science fiction, I believe. And Le Guin was another one that helped me understand her use of environment had a huge impact on me. So that's where I'm coming from as far as sci-fi goes.
It's interesting, Joshua and Manuele, you both mentioned you're more interested in kind of the emotional landscape underneath the science fiction. And I definitely see that in all three of your works, the stuff that's about to come up. And I'm curious, and in the context of these graphic novels and your broader work, does the emotion always come first? Does it start with a character? Does it start with a broader idea? How do each of you kind of find yourself getting into those things?
So I think in my stories, since I work with a very unconventional way of doing comics, I don't normally draw any storyboard. I just start with the first page and then I continue. I use my characters are more important in the way of the story. I don't mean to say the story is not important, but the characters make the story. They open up all the doors and see what happens. So actually, if I have to think about a story, I'm a bit like confused. Everything is a bit foggy. But if I stick to the characters, then I am kind of feel the same feeling of being amazed by something. If they see something in the sky, then I try to think about what this phenomenon is, and then I go through their own feelings, because I think the most important thing about science fiction is that all these things that we normally attributed to literature, like fantasy, I think nowadays they are a bit more belonging to technology. I just do a small example. When you see a movie of like the Avengers, even though it's a science fictional movie, you will see like the superheroes, like Iron Man, they open up like holograms doing gestures like that, like opening iPad stuff. But I mean, this is not imagination. This is not fantasy. This is technology. There's nothing futuristic about it because we do it already. And the purpose of our work is to invent something new, not to repeat what technology is doing. In this sense, technology is more powerful than our imagination as author and artist. So I would love to that our books, they take over again the possibility to invent something new. That's why I took classical themes like telepathy, classical themes of the science fiction that Ballard used a lot of stuff, but to bypass in a way the technology stuff. Like in 1001 Nights, the flying carpet was something that you cannot explain technologically, but opens up a kind of big landscape. So sorry, the question was not exactly about this. So but in a way, yeah, I think.
I wanted to interject real quick, if that's okay. Something I really enjoy about both of your books is the way that it explores, Manuele's book through telepathy, and then Josh's book through a technologically induced linked consciousness. It explores the mind primarily, and that's so interesting to me. I think like Manuele is suggesting, a lot of science fiction has gotten away from that. I read a fair amount of new wave science fiction from the 60s and 70s, which was created during like the psychedelic era. And I think there are many writers of that era were talking about the mind, and I see that less and less in science fiction now. But I think it's like what's most interesting, like, technology is changing the human mind. That's more interesting than the technology itself. We all know that social media is altering the way our minds work, the way our brains are wired, or it's changing human consciousness, and I think that's more interesting than like suits and spaceships and stuff, even though those things are fun. So yeah, that was very interesting to me about both of your books.
Thanks, Lai. Well, the original question was about the use of character and emotion and what comes first. I would say that it all grows pretty organically in my writing process, but without character, I don't believe there's much purpose in my stories. My hope is develop a greater understanding of we know our biological function, but maybe if there are any other functions of the species. And we have a pretty great understanding of our bodies, of the human body. But the mind, like you were saying, it's not an unexplored thing, but it is something of a frontier, and we have a lot more to understand. And I think the future will involve the mind more than the body, and it's already moving that way as far as our technological progression goes. But technology aside, my intention in writing is still to study the human condition, and maybe it seems to me that the psychological world and the physical world aren't so different. I mean, the physical world is what we experience is entirely up to our perceptual limitations, and it's defined by perceptual limitations. So looking beyond that, we can develop a greater understanding of the human condition if we take psychological into consideration as well as the physical. I'm not really interested in doing any of that unless I have character and characters I like, and I want to explore, like you were saying, anyway, to allow them to surprise you, just act out in front of you in your mind, and put two different characters together and see and new possibilities arise that maybe you didn't think of before. So I like, it's almost like playing action figures as a child. I put them together, and even though those characters have already been established, I can make my own characters and see what they do with one another. And a lot of interesting things come out of that.
Just to finish, it was very interesting what you both said, and I think Lane really picked up the very crucial thing, is that we always think that emotions are always our inner feelings are always the same. Technology changes. We have a bicycle and then a car and then a spaceship, but we stay human. But things are not like that. The example of the socials, it's very it's very strong because it proves that inner emotion can be manipulated by computers. And so it's possible to do a story of emotion in a way. The feelings of my grandmother, they're radically a bit different from mine, but the feeling of our grandchildren might be very, very different from ours. So this perspective, I think, interested all the authors that are dealing with science fiction right now in these years. This new point of view.
Hmm.
Well, you've kind of wandered into something that I definitely wanted to talk about, which is you have that people tend to use the term hard science fiction, or there are those hardcore science fiction fans who will tell you that the purpose of science fiction is to follow the path of various technologies and movements and push toward what your vision of the future, almost as though it's just some form of prognostication, right? There are a lot of very sort of technologically based, almost cold stories that follow that vein. And the three of you, each in your own way, whether we're talking about corporatization of space travel or climate shifting, or people trying to survive in a radically different version of our planet, you all are working within certain sci-fi tropes that I would say tend toward looking toward the future. But there's also a very kind of, I think there's something intuitive happening in each of your works that's very human, that allows you to explore those spaces without getting too cold with it. And I'm wondering what that's like for each of you, kind of walking that line.
I'm not super, I don't think human beings are terribly good at prognostication. Like, I think we can predict certain things with certainty, but many things we just really can't. And so I think that extends to art and to science fiction. Like, I think some of my favorite sci-fi books have made interesting predictions, but I almost see that as like an accident more than anything. It's more just like, I don't believe in like, oh, this book predicted this, and this, therefore it was a good book, I see science fiction more as like a way of, it's a stylized or imaginative treatment of reality. It's a subjective version of reality. That uses some unreality in it. I mean, like my book Lure takes place in a reality where like the Earth has a twin planet, an ocean planet called Lure, which is clearly not the reality we live in, but it's just kind of a stylized alternate reality that it has some kind of future-y tech things going on, but it's not really about that.
Well, I think it's like a matter of the technology, of the story serving the technology, or the technology serving the story. And like you said, Lane, my intention is not to predict the future. It's just the technology that through thinking, I came to serve the story, and that's why I'm using it. It's not the purpose of the story. Whereas I think with harder sci-fi, it is more about defining what the future will be, and that's not my interest. It's defining how humans, or not defining, but exploring how humans behave within certain possible structures.
But for me, I never thought, even though I'm a fan of science fiction in all domains, I never thought about doing like science fictional comics. It means that I'm a bit afraid when you define a comic with a genre, like you say science fiction, or in Italy in France you have like erotic comics. I mean, you can have erotic in all your comics, even though your comic are not erotical. And also, if you can talk about fantastic stuff, issues, without, I hope, being classified as science fiction. Ballard had a very good definition of what he did. He said his books, they're not like backwards or forwards in time. They're just a step or two step on the right or on the left. is a point of view that is just slightly not in the same position of ours. And in this way, like in the last book I did, Celestia was in this case, a metaphorical experiment to take an island that is Venice, change his name, and then look at her story or reality from a slight different point of view. If I had called it Venice, then everybody would have thought about the San Marco Piazza and then the tourist. But if you just take the same and you change the names, you start to look at a possible, not future, but a parallel existence of this island, exactly in the same way that Gotham City is New York, and in the last movie of Joker is really New York, is filmed in New York. But if you change the name, then you get the feeling, but you are free to investigate about this place. And
it allows for different or greater perspective. I think it's the perspective I'm personally searching for, and I'm hoping the audience, maybe allowing the audience a different perspective as well.
Well, you've all just kind of touched on another thing I wanted to talk about, which is that each of you in Lure, in Celestia, and in Nodaway, you all have, for lack of a better word, other worlds that you've built, whether it's a twin planet or a space station or an island. And you've already spoken to a little bit, Lane and Manuele in particular, about how you kind of thought about those worlds. I'm curious what each of your world building approaches are in terms of how you go about designing these places in terms of art and in terms of story.
Yeah, I wanted to back up real quick and just talk about how this project originated, because it's kind of strange. As you mentioned in your intro, I did a script for Vice way back in 2015 called Envoy. And that was sort of the proto version of this book. I worked on that book for a full year. I had 50 or more completed pages, hand colored with gouache, that were ready to go. And then I was doing it was being serialized on Vice.com. And one day I decided to read through the entire story, and I did not like it. I didn't like the writing. I didn't like the concept. I thought it was kind of a mess. So I scrapped it, and I began the project anew at the beginning of 2016. And the original version of Lure was more pulpy. It was more sci-fi fantasy. It was more a constructed reality that had no connection to our reality. And but it was very difficult to scrap all of that work. And the way I guess I coped with that was that I kept a couple of core elements from the original story, which was a young woman named Jo and a planet called Lure. So I took those two simple concepts, and then I just added a lot of stuff from my real life, particularly a few kind of strange corporate-y art jobs I've had over the years. And that was kind of how I came to the theme of art, and of art being complicit in corporate domination and in the ruling class. That kind of came later. And I also had the idea of the other planet as, I wanted it to represent something. And then so in the new version, it came to represent the remoteness of the ruling class from the rest of society. And the scale of income inequality.
I see the statement you're making about responsibility in your work too, as far as if an artist is working for a corporation, what responsibility do they have to truth and fact? And I can see that as well.
Thank you.
In my case, I was starting really with Venice and the origin of Venice. I mean, this island is already quite science fiction in its history, because it's an island that was built by men. It's not a geographical like a Vulcan island. There was nothing, and the man decided to build something there, and decided to build something there in the lagoon because there was an invasion at the time, 400 years after the birth of Christ, from the I miss the words, gli Unni, the invader from the north and the west. So people took refuge in the lagoon, and they decided, and year after year, decided to build this island that became, like, in a couple of hundred years, one of the most powerful city of the Mediterranean, of the old Europe. I normally say that Venice was the Manhattan of year 1500. So actually, this island is so already, we forget about it, because when we talk about Venice now, we just talk about tourism and going underwater. But if you take away this first layer, you will discover something that is really also very strong. It's not so fragile, resisted, was built because of a decision of mankind, and resisted so many years. So why not to give a reload of these origins with a new migration that is actually coming right now from the south, from Africa, and it's going all through Italy to the north. And scientists, they say that this is just the beginning, of course, because of climate change and political situation in the Maghreb and north of Africa. So I thought, why not to give a second rebirth of Venice, this time with a new name, and give her maybe a new chance to be a central role in the new world.
Manuele, did your interest and experience in architecture affect your decision to place it in Venice as well?
Sorry, if I'm interested.
You're in the introduction, it said you're an architect.
Yes.
Did your experience with architecture influence your choice of Venice as well, or like the buildings they come to later in the story?
No, they come at the first moment, the buildings, because when I have this frame, but not only frame, this particular buildings story, this helps out to develop. Actually, I just say, like, very shortly, there's a building in Celestia, a very vertical one, that was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. It was a project for Venice that was rejected. And I'm a huge fan of Frank Lloyd Wright, and I was very sad that this building wasn't built. So I gave him also a second chance to be built, at least in my fantasy, and be lived by this new the group of youngsters with the telepaths that reminds, of course, a lot of the X-Men. But
I read the book, but I didn't catch the Frank Lloyd Wright reference. I'll have to go back and look at it.
You just have now a couple of drawings of this project, but
that's cool. I'm a fan as well.
Yeah, I immediately thought of Venice. I've never actually been there.
Me neither.
You're welcome.
My thoughts behind the environment. Again, it's like the technology. It's what served the story. In order to serve the story, I needed there to be an off-world base, and it just made sense that there would be another international space station eventually that could hold more people. My concept is likely, what I conceived of is likely larger and more less realistic than what would actually be possible for the century. Environments, again, they serve the story, but I also need it to be an environment I'm interested in drawing over and over again. So my approach to designing the environment, a lot of modern sci-fi makes things really clean, and a lot of perfection. And Lane usually did a really good job when they go to Lure, and the internal inside environment were really well done, because they were presented for corporate reasons and everything, and it was really really well done. But I took the approach of dirtying things up a little bit, making them look used, making them not look quite as interesting as they might look in a movie. Like the International Space Station 2 is kind of a clunky hive looking building. It's nothing beautiful. The ship flying out to it is more just a next level version of what we're doing now as far as spacecraft goes. It's we have an idea of what the future should look like or be, and it's but whenever you look at how the current times were portrayed in movies like Back to the Future or Blade Runner, it's obviously nowhere near that. So I tried to scale back my design to go with the approach that while the fantastic elements are great, and I like beautiful design, but in my own books I chose to keep them a little more limited and a little less interesting, because I think that's likely where we would go, judging by past projections.
Yeah, the space station has kind of a, I guess it has kind of a utilitarian look, but it's very immersive the way it was designed, and the way you know, the kind of like hand scanner, and it was very immersive because it took you step by step through, you know.
Well, good. No, I telling the story, you hate to give every detail, but I wanted to give the reader a feel for what that environment was like. But I also I like things like throwing in dot matrix printers and things that obviously don't even really exist now, just having fun with the technology. But it's either using technology that's already existed, which would make sense with the way especially American government works, as far as like making little progress, and at times having fun with embellishment.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Vonnegut earlier, and that sequence in Volume 1 where she arrives and she's having trouble getting people to kind of confirm where she's supposed to go is just absolutely Vonnegut to me.
Thanks. Yeah, it's there's going to be the frustrations we experience as humans aren't going to be gone in 70 years. We're still going to be frustrated with
something.
Something.
And that's kind of a dirty space thing too that I like in that kind of science fiction, and nothing quite works as well as you think it would, and that's
I try to keep that in mind, that humans are still going to be unable to achieve perfection, at least for a few centuries, most likely.
One thing, and Manuele brought it up, and Lane kind of brought it up too in talking about corporate art gigs. One thing I'm fascinated by is with stuff like this, stuff that is obviously genre storytelling, but genre storytellers are not just informed by genre; they're informed by their own lives and experiences, and other genres, and any number of things combined to make the stew that forms these stories. So keeping in mind the corporate art gigs and the lost Frank Lloyd Wright masterpiece, I wanted to ask what other what readers might consider unlikely influences came about that you brought into these stories, even though they lean sci-fi.
I have an embarrassing thing that I do sometimes, which is to get some design ideas. I have sometimes just Googled like future hotel or future car or future sailboat, and I don't copy what I find completely, but that's just kind of an embarrassing thing. That it's you definitely get a lot of like white and silver, like smooth molded architecture stuff that way.
Type exterior, lots of eggshell type exterior, no dents or yellowing or anything.
Well, and Lane, Joshua pointed out, like your designs in Lure, they're obviously your designs, but they do evoke that kind of corporate space of like, this is a corporation trying to think what rich people would want this to look like. And so that's a really interesting way to use that, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in here's maybe a better answer to that question, is that I'm interested in like the story's kind of set in a hotel, and like on Lure, like it's just a big ocean with like one building on it, and they it's not like I didn't want to create a big vast world that they could explore or anything like that, because I feel like keeping some constraint on the setting can be helpful in telling a story. But I'm interested in like ideas of like the good life and of luxury. Like I'm interested in our culture's ideas about what a fun vacation is, or what it is to like what is pleasurable and what is enjoyable. Like I think there are a lot of like I enjoy staying in hotels. That is kind of an influence on my book. But I also just like it can be kind of funny the culturally and I'm speaking from an American perspective, like the culturally accepted ideas about what is a good time, what is a nice vacation, what is like an experience worth having, you know. And it's often a very like pre-packaged thing, you know, a very nothing unexpected, you know. Those kinds of issues are interesting to me.
The ideal.
Yeah.
To me, but in my work, there are always a lot of influences that I cannot cut one from the other. It goes from paintings a lot, and of course other movies and and cartoons a lot. But as I mentioned before, being grown up also with American comics, I was a fan of a certain ages of superhero comics, like the X-Men by Claremont and Byrne, Dark Phoenix Saga. If I read it right now, I always think it's really well done. It's just well done for kids of that age, and they're smart ideas, good artwork. And so like this character Kitty, the girl who can
Kitty Pryde?
go through Kitty Pryde, she can go through the walls. I remember when I read, and I was 14 of age, and she says that she has like this incredible headaches, and then she discovered that she can go through the walls, and she had her parents has a speech with Professor Xavier. So it's a very like, lo-fi science fiction, and you can really identify because you're reading it, and you are 14 as well, and your parents, they speak with the professors, and you hope that when you have a headache, maybe it will give you a super so there are really stuff that sticks with me, and I'm really happy to develop sometimes Dora as something a bit of Kitty Pryde. But then it's this, and also as Joshua mentioned before, architecture, it's really a huge engine that you can play with to develop the story. It's not just a background. For instance, when I thought about what was outside Celestia, outside the island, if the island resembles the real Venice, the outside, I wanted to invent something new, and I didn't want to go again with the cliche of like ruins of industrial cities. So I saw old picture of this residence by Ricardo Bofill. Is a Spanish architect who built this stuff on the Spanish coast, but in the 60s, when the coast was not so like that, it's all built, and they just looked like castles on the rocks, on the sea, but really bright painted castles in like a very modern style. So, I mean, if you look at them now with Google Street View, they just are together with other strange and bizarre architecture. But at the moment, they gave me like a huge impact. And I thought that they could be like the futuristic version of medieval castles in how do you say middle age middle age castles, a new version. And in a way also the social situation is almost the same. There's almost no commerce at all. There are no cities, but there are castles where the people hide themselves from, they don't know even more what, and it's dangerous to go out. They just move from one castle to the other. So and that goes on and on. There's a sequence where you just have like kind of a telepathic transfer, and just the colors, they go by like that. And I was I am very fond of the work of Mark Rothko, an American expressionist painter, I would say. He makes these abstract paintings most of the time with 3 colors, like huge landscapes that you should see live. And I always think, can we push the comic medium a little further into abstraction sometimes, but not in a very difficult way for the reader. So to slip into this trip, into this transfer, so that you just the sequence of color can start to tell a story. And I mean, comic, it's a very mixed language from the very beginning. So why not using all these influences and try to modify this engine? As Moebius said once, when he made a lot of improvisation, he said, we always do comics like they're built like a house with a door and the windows, and you know where to go. But you could make a comic like a field of grain. You can make it like a match, or you can make it like an elephant. You can make monsters in a way, mixing several influences together.
I'd say my influences, like I said, it's hard to pinpoint, but the stuff I gravitate towards are those that defy genre or blend genre intentionally, whether it be film, music, or books, which I consume all 3 in incredible amounts, and I'm kind of a sponge. So, and I don't limit myself to genre. I don't listen to a specific genre of music or read a specific genre of book or movie. But those pieces or works that I gravitate towards most are those that either intentionally or unintentionally defy genre. And like Vonnegut, it's like you could consider him to be a sci-fi author, but he's also many other things. Or with music, look at Prince. He's not just funk. He's rock. He can do all sorts of things. So I love him. Love him because of that. I love Vonnegut because of that. Because not just because of that, but it's one of the things that makes me that helps me to enjoy those things so much. Is I don't feel like I'm reading something that specifically that has to be working within a genre, because I think things like that can be pretty limiting, and they can also affect your writing and negatively sometimes. So I don't. If you not a way to the first at least half of the 360 pages, there's nothing sci-fi about it. And I know some hard sci-fi readers may have difficulty with that, but it's not my interest to create a purely science fiction book. Although I have no problems with books or anything that are strictly one genre. But it's my intention to tell the story and to involve the technology as I go along. And I've to pinpoint individual influences would be pretty difficult, but I would say definitely people like Kubrick and Vonnegut, like I stated earlier, are very, very important. Were very important in my development.
Well, one thing I wanted to talk about as well is just kind of the getting a little more granular into your working processes themselves, because I read, Joshua, that you did something like 4 years of planning before you started.
I began in 2008 or so, probably writing, and I got sidetracked by a fire and a couple other things, but I didn't actually start drawing the book until the end of 2012. So I'd worked on it, just notes and collecting information and reading and getting as much, informing myself as much as possible, and also wrote to make I was working a specific point, so I wouldn't draw 2,000 pages of comics and find out that I didn't have an ending. But yeah, please go ahead.
Well, I wanted to, with that in mind, and I read an interview with Lane where you said that you don't necessarily work from full scripts, and you had just mentioned throwing out a bunch of stuff, scrapping a bunch of stuff that eventually worked into lore. How much, Joshua just kind of answered this already, but how much do you plan ahead? And how much room do you leave each of you for spontaneity within that?
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, like I feel happiest when I'm working on drawing a page, and so if I'm taking some time to write the script, I would always rather be just actually drawing. So I've had trouble writing complete scripts. Lure, I had no idea where it was going when I started. It was a very long project. I'm trying to be a little more streamlined going forward. But I have had difficulty writing complete scripts. I think that sometimes I generate ideas better when I'm working on the finished page and when I have like visual cues of like, see the characters, see the space they're in, and then I can think of what they're saying and what they're doing. You know, I think that I just have a visual brain. So
when I'm writing, I do like I write the story 3 or 4 times, loose prose, and edit it as I go along. And when I actually sit down to draw the page, then I break down the prose section by section, like, okay, this much is a page. So I may have some dialogue I like there. I don't write a traditional script, but I maybe have like 25, 30 pages of handwriting that I refer to as I go along. And then when I get to the page, I break it down in that, when I get to the page, so it's fresh. It doesn't feel stale. I don't adhere to like set dialogue. I don't adhere to like what needs to be in each panel. If I was working with someone else, of course, that would be a necessity. But one of the benefits of being an individual comic artist, cartoonist, is you don't have to set things up for other people. You can just go panel by panel. I really admire people like Lane and Manuele, who Manuele, you specifically said earlier that you just start drawing, and I've always admired that, but I've never been the kind of cartoonist, except for a book I did called Driven by Lemons. I did, and that was a great experience. But as far as telling a story, I'm very much at least have to have an outline or a beginning, middle, and end to follow an arc as I draw, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Joshua, but I don't suggest my method.
Don't do it.
Suicidal method. Yes, and I think Celestia was the experiment I made that was more pushed on improvisation, because yeah, I believe that it's possible to do wonderful comics like that has been storyboarded until the smallest detail, but it's possible also to do other experiments with comics. Exactly in the same way, surrealists made experiments of automatic writing, like you just write down what comes into your mind without a rational filter, and then you give a form to what or with the example of the cadaveric ski, the drawing made by several hands that don't see what the other made and see what. So Celestia was an experiment of improvisation rather pushed in this direction. When the books opened, you have a silhouette of a character. I didn't know anything about him, but then when I drew from the face, I drew this teardrop on the face, and it reminds me of this mask of Pierrot, La Commedia dell'arte, and then I just stick to this character. There's a but then I improvise, but then I kind of have a documentation, for example, on Pierrot, and I search everything about this mask. I see all the movies that it's possible to see, all the poetry also about him, and it's very interesting because it turns out that this Pierrot is a kind of a very sensible kind of artistic nature, but also a killer in the tradition. So it's the killer who cries after the murder. And I thought to myself, this is wonderful. Let's go ahead in this direction. Let's take a very controversial character and see what happens. And then I put him together with other like characters and see what the combination gives. Of course, at the beginning, this method is fantastic because you have the impression that everything you do is right, and every door you open, it's something new, and every character can say exactly what he wants, and it will function with the story. But when you're in the middle, you start to have a bit of fear because they, okay. And actually, all the second half of a book is a hell of work to bring things together to see where the story can land, because otherwise you will have this impression. It's like when you tell a dream to your girlfriend or to your friend and you say, oh, I had a wonderful dream, and it was so strange, it was so incredible, but the other doesn't get at all the feeling. So when you do a story, you have to use some instruments to close it and to give a sense of a judgment, so that the reader can have also his own judgment.
We're coming to the end of our time, but I did want to ask each of you one more question, just because it's, for selfish reasons, it's a thing I love asking creators, because you kind of never know what you're going to get, and it's a little abstract, so bear with me. These books are the work of years. All of you have spent years bringing these things together into wonderful stories, and that's because of the length of time. I'm always curious, when you put that much of yourself and that much of your time into a work, what do you learn about yourself along that journey? As a creator, as a person, however you want to look at it.
The most difficult question in the end.
Yeah, I feel like this project I've learned to communicate much better as an artist, much better than I did before. But I don't have myself really to thank for that. Like I really owe a lot of that to my partner, Anya Davidson, who's also my favorite cartoonist. And she looked at my work regularly when I was working on it. And it's really because of her feedback that I think I developed this new ability to communicate in a more direct and clear way as an artist. So I really don't, that's I think what I've learned, and that, but it's not something I learned entirely on my own. So
well, me, it might sound a bit depressing, but I think that what I learned with this book, it's also a bit my limits, my boundaries, because you start with a really huge thing that you're carrying on your shoulders, and then in the end, a bit, I must say, you have to wrap it up and deliver something that is finished. And sometimes there are some things that I would have done better, something that I would say, I said, if I had more talent, I would developed better. So I don't want to say I'm always happy. I'm really happy when I can draw and work on my books. Is like the greatest freedom on earth. But book after book, I would love to be more. I see at the masters of comics like Moebius, Winsor McKay, and I see that I belong to a very different, how do you say, league that is very much more limited. But anyway, I had fun in doing it. It was a huge effort, and now it's ready for the American readers.
I would say that writing this book, what I learned is probably too difficult to say since I'm so close to the end of it. But over the 20 plus years I've been working in comics, what I've learned, and what Manuele just said is pretty spot on, is my limitations and working with those limitations, but also understanding your strengths and working towards improving those, not just in your art but in life. Because while we're doing this, we have family, friends, and loved ones who are being endlessly patient, because comics take so much time and so much effort. So really just like with any life process, it's learning balance, and through learning your limitations and your strengths, you can work towards that balance. So if anything, if I don't think of it as what I've learned from an individual book, but from what I've learned from this path, it's just how to make life easier for myself and the people around me, while also trying to keep creating.
All right. That is our time for the new science fiction panel. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you, Manuele. Thank you, Lane. Thank you to Fantagraphics for having me. And enjoy the rest of your Comic-Con at home, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.